So what in the world does a broken lock from over 250 years ago have to do with your privacy today? Well, it turns out a lot more than you'd think. We're going to get into the incredible story of a brave printer whose fight against the government became the secret foundation for some of our most basic rights.
It's a pretty intense question, right? And look, today, for most of us, the answer is a pretty obvious no. But here's the thing, that no wasn't always a sure thing. It had to be won. And this is the story of how that happened.
Okay, so picture this. We're in London, 1762. Our main character is a guy named John Entick. He was a writer, a printer, just trying to make a living. And he had absolutely no idea he was about to become this unlikely hero in a story that would literally change the world.
So just try to imagine this. You're at home, minding your own business, and suddenly agents of the state are at your door. And they don't just, knock politely. No. They show up with an axe and a crowbar and they just smash their way in. This isn't some hypothetical I'm making up. This is exactly what happened to John Entick.
And what happened next was just a total violation. For 4 straight hours, they turned his life completely upside down. They ransacked his home, broke open his locks, his boxes. They sat there and read his private papers. Then they grabbed hundreds of his pamphlets and charts, his life's work. And the craziest part of all this, they did it all without even charging him with a specific crime.
So how could they possibly get away with something like this? Well, they had this thing called a general warrant. And you can basically think of it as the government's all-access pass to your entire life.
A general warrant was just terrifyingly vague. It didn't have to name a specific person. It didn't have to name a specific place. It basically gave officials the power to search anyone, anywhere, for pretty much anything they decided was, improper. It was a blank check for the state to just walk all over you.
And this right here is the heart of the conflict. So on one side, you have the general warrant. It's like a giant fishing net, right? Just scooping up anyone and anything. And then on the other side, you have the kind of specific warrant we know today, which is more like a magnifying glass, super targeted and precise. The fight between these two ideas, well, that was a fight for a fundamental liberty.
Most people would have just been terrified, broken, probably. But not John Entick. Nope. In this incredible act of courage, this humble printer decides to sue the king's messengers for trespassing. I mean, think about that. He was taking on the entire might of the British state.
So the case goes to court. It eventually becomes known as Entick v. Carrington. And of course, the government's lawyers, they show up ready to fight. They argued that they had every single right to do what they did.
And their arguments might actually sound a little familiar. First, they pulled the state necessity card. The classic, the ends justify the means argument. Second, they pointed to tradition, basically saying, hey, we've been doing it this way forever. And third, they argued that, well, since there's no specific law saying we can't do this, it must be totally legal. So this whole thing lands in front of the Chief Justice, a man named Lord Camden. And his judgment, well, it wasn't just going to decide the fate of one printer. No way. It was going to echo through the centuries and really define the relationship between a person and the state.
So Lord Camden listens to all of this, and then he just systematically takes apart the government's entire case, piece by piece. He shot down the whole tradition argument, he completely rejected the necessity argument, and in doing so, he established this revolutionary principle. The government's desire for security doesn't just automatically get to stomp all over a citizen's basic liberty.
And then he delivers the knockout punch with this one incredible line. He's basically saying that government power isn't some, mysterious thing that just exists in the shadows. No. If the government wants to claim it has a power, it has to be able to point to a specific law in the books that gives it that power. If it can't find it there, then that power just doesn't exist. Period.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. The government isn't above the law. It's subject to it. It can't just make up the rules as it goes along to suit its own needs. I mean, this was a massive shift. It put the rights of the individual on solid legal ground against the awesome power of the state.
So, John Entick, he actually won his case. He got £300 in damages, which was a lot of money back then. But the real prize, the real win, was the legacy this whole thing created. A legacy of liberty that would spread way, way beyond England.
And seriously, you can draw a straight line from that courtroom right to the rights you have today. The idea that your home is your castle, it was born right here. That idea then travels across the Atlantic, and it just fuels the American revolutionaries' arguments against British tyranny. And then, finally, it gets written directly into the DNA of the United States with the Fourth Amendment.
I mean, think about it. This one single case gave us so much. It established that our private property is protected. It confirmed our right to stay silent so we can't be forced to incriminate ourselves. It forced the government to point to actual laws to justify its actions. And maybe most important of all, it put everyone, even the state itself, firmly under the rule of law.
So whenever we talk about the right to privacy or the right to be secure from the government, it's not just some abstract idea from a textbook, right? It's a right that was forged in a real fight by a real person who just stood his ground and said, no, you can't do this.
And that, of course, brings us right back to today. The principle from 1765 is crystal clear, but our world has changed a lot. Lord Camden was protecting physical papers locked away in a wooden desk. So the real question for us now is, in this age of emails and the cloud and digital footprints, what are our private papers today, and how do we keep them safe?